This project was supported by Award 15PJDP 22GK00946MUMU, awarded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and the Office of Justice Programs. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this videocast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Reflections on Research. I'm your host, Mike Geringer, Senior Director of Research and Quality at Mentor, and also one of the folks who works on the National Mentoring Resource Center on behalf of OJJDP. Welcome to this episode. I'm joined today by Dr. Kristian Jones, who is an associate professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Washington. I believe UW is the Huskies, which we all know is the least feared animal in the entire animal kingdom. No, I'm just kidding. As a lifelong Oregon Duck, I got to get in a little shot to the bigger school up north there. But always good to have a fellow Pacific Northwest resident on the podcast here with us. So welcome, Kristian. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Quick clarification. I'm actually an assistant professor, not an associate. Unfortunately, I'm not the fastest person to get tenure of all time. 2 years would be a record, but I appreciate that shout out.
All right. Well, sorry I botched your title, but hopefully you'll keep moving up that ladder and hopefully be all tenured and all those good things at some point soon in your career. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you here. I wanted to start out, I'm asking this question of all of our guests this year. I'm just curious how you got into mentoring as a topic that you study. Were you aware of mentoring and mentors when you were growing up, or was this a topic area that you kind of stumbled into as you got along in your academic career? I'm just curious how you came to this work.
Yeah, well, actually both. So been familiar with the term mentor for as long as I can remember, but never was in an official mentoring program like Big Brothers Big Sisters. More so considered my older friends to be mentors. My uncle was a huge mentor of mine. I have a really close cousin on my dad's side who was really influential on my adolescent years. So I've always had really phenomenal mentors, just never in a formal mentoring capacity. So I've always loved mentoring, always thought it was really important, participated in a few mentoring programs in undergrad, but I didn't study it, or I didn't come to my PhD program to study it until the end of my first year, just like reflecting on how difficult the doctoral experience was and how I wouldn't be where I was, even in that moment, without some pretty phenomenal mentors. So doing some reflection and thinking about really studying what I'm passionate about, I decided to merge the mentoring interest with my love for youth development. I was a mental health counselor for a few years before deciding to get my PhD. And when I reflected on it, I found that I was more like a therapeutic mentor for my youth who had more mild mental health concerns. And a lot of my sessions just consisted of just listening to them, supporting them, making them laugh, teaching them tangible skills such as managing their emotions, acknowledging their emotions. Goal setting was a big one, and just having someone they could confide to, specifically someone like outside of their family. I would say the same thing as their mom and dad, but for whatever reason, it just resonated different from me. So that's how I stumbled on youth mentoring, and I'm very happy to be here. It's been a really cool ride so far.
It's really cool. And I'm glad you mentioned the role that kind of older peers played when you were growing up. I think we always think of mentors as like these old, wise folks that we connect to. But, you know, growing up, a lot of times it's like the older brothers of your friends or something. You know, there's kind of these closer near peers that I think really help serve as role models as much as those adults do sometimes. I wanted to ask you about your work here, and I think this will be a nice segue into kind of what you've studied and what your research over the years is all about. You have done a lot around looking at the experiences of Black youth in particular in mentoring programs. And I'm just curious from your perspective, and maybe we can broaden this out to, BIPOC youth in general, but focus on Black youth if you'd like here. What do you think our movement, mentoring programs, the whole effort that we're doing to get kids mentors, what do you think our field is doing well to meet the needs of Black youth in America? And what do you think are things that as a field we could be doing better to meet the needs of those kids?
Yeah, so a good bit of my work, specifically my dissertation, was really looking at how non-Black mentors worked and served Black youth to the best of their ability, and specifically really talked about specific issues like racial identity, issues that were impacting their specific communities and how it impacted them. And I was just really interested in how someone who didn't share the same racial identity, and even more specifically, someone who wasn't in the same community talked about these certain issues. And um, one thing that I think has really been a great positive over the last few years, specifically in the last decade, is the acknowledged focus of cultural sensitivity, cultural relevancy. We're kind of getting away from cultural competence because no one can know everything about every single culture. But I do think the idea of it was good nature in terms of like culture is really important, and not just race, someone's geographic location, the music they listen to, the food that they eat, where their grandparents are from. All of that is extremely important. And to really get to know someone, you got to know which culture they identify with, even if that's video game culture, nerd culture, um, really anything that helps you really get to know someone. And I think cultural sensitivity and cultural relevancy, all of those different movements have been really great over the last few decades. And I think mentoring programs have been a lot more intentional on at least acknowledging that and being important and really putting more resources and doing more trainings on being culturally sensitive.
What about areas of weakness? It sounds like we're getting better maybe at teaching mentors to cross some of those racial and cultural divides. Where do you still see gaps around this work, or do you see gaps?
Yeah, the biggest gap that I see is not only a mentoring issue, but in my opinion, just society wise, is just the lack of acknowledgement of within group differences. So the diversity within Blackness is something that I'm really passionate about. And just because two people are Black doesn't mean that they're going to have the same experiences or even that their perception of the same experience is going to be the same. So I think we could do a lot better on acknowledging that and taking intersectionality into account. Like, what does it mean to be Black and a woman, or to be Black and disabled, or Black and able-bodied, or so on and so forth. So I think mentoring programs could do a better job of just being as intentional as possible on really honoring those people's identities. Um, and then really asking the youth themselves, like, which identity is most important to you, and then having that dictate, how the mentoring relationship should go.
Yeah, no, I think oftentimes programs make a lot of assumptions, perhaps about groups of youth that they're serving, and there is, it makes the job seem a little easier if everyone's kind of the same. I don't have to create a customized mentoring experience for every child in my program. But I think you're right in that there is a lot of diversity within that, and I mean, in some ways, every young person in a mentoring program needs and deserves and gets a unique form of help, right? That is ideally, when done well, tailored to all those different aspects of their personality and identity. So thank you for that. Hopefully the rest of my questions here don't lump young people together in the way
Yeah.
you just suggested that we don't. But I know that one of the more popular papers that you have authored, you really looked a lot at the experiences of Black youth who were paired with a white mentor in a program setting. And I'm just curious, could you maybe summarize for our viewers kind of what you learned through that study? What were these young people telling you about their experiences? What was that like for them? And were there things that you learned there that you think our field could apply kind of those findings to their work a little bit?
Yeah, so I've actually done a few different studies that I think would be super relevant to address here. So I've had the privilege of working with a program called Kingmakers in Seattle. And this is a program in Seattle Public Schools that's an elective in certain schools that teaches Afrocentric history. Um, and talking to the Black youth in that program and learning from their experiences, just how powerful it is to see a curriculum that reflects people who look like you, learning certain things that you didn't know, um, having conversations with people and learning about their own history. Extremely powerful. I mean, it sounds cliche, but representation really does matter in a lot of ways. And another study that I had the privilege of doing was talking to non-Black mentors across the country who volunteer for Big Brothers Big Sisters who actually mentored Black youth and learned a whole lot in that study. But the biggest thing that really struck me was just how adamant the mentors were that they gained a lot more than the youth did, and they learned so much about themselves, life in general. They gained new skills that they didn't have before. Someone talked about being a better communicator. Someone talked about this increased social awareness and kind of grappling with that and what to do with that. And just even as something as small as watching a documentary on Netflix that they never even would have thought of to watch before because of their experiences mentoring a Black youth. So really cultivating different forms of critical consciousness was something I hadn't thought of before doing the study, but was really cool to see people gain new social awareness and really trying to make a difference because of this newfound social awareness.
That's great. It's funny. I've heard from a lot of folks who've volunteered in mentoring programs over the years about how that experience changed how they think about certain groups of people in our country. And I feel like we're at a bit of a moment. Well, maybe we've always been in this moment, but it feels these days like we have a lot of citizens making a lot of assumptions about their fellow Americans that they don't know very well. And it's been a rough uh, period of time here, seeing a lot of assumptions made about how other people live, what other people deserve in forms of help, who's a threat to us, who's not. It's but when you bring people together and they can be in relationship and learn from each other, a lot of that stuff just disappears, right? And so I think it's great that you kind of had these mentors reflecting on that and really, expressing change that had happened within them and for them from the experience. What about from the young people's perspective? Did you interview their mentees as well and kind of get their perspective on it?
Yeah, so for that specific study, I didn't interview the mentees, but for other studies that I've done where I've been able to talk to youth, it's really interesting. So they really appreciated having a mentor that looked like them, but even more specifically, they appreciated someone that was from the community that they lived in. Um, but then there was also people who talked about, like, let's say the mentor wasn't from their specific community. They talked about a value in that and just like learning about this new place that they had never been to before. So I mean, it sounds simple, but there's benefits of having people who look like you and people who are completely different than you. So ideally, we would be using multiple mentors or people would be enrolled in multiple programs to work on different aspects of themselves. So someone could be working on a racial identity. For someone who's really interested in STEM, they could have a mentor help them in STEM. If someone who's really passionate about being a teacher, they can have a mentor who can teach them about what does it mean to be an educator. So it was really cool for youth to talk about just the benefits of mentoring and going back to a question you said before, what could mentoring programs be doing better? It's just kind of tracking the outcomes that youth find are important. Like it might, of course, we all know graduating from high school is really important. But for the youth, it might be, I really just want to find like what I'm passionate about. Like that's really important to me, or I really want to get good at or like, I want to get my driver's license. I want to become really good at driving so I don't have to rely on my grandmother to take me everywhere. So it was really cool just to hear from their perspective what they really value. And it was interesting to see how that might be different from the actual mentoring program.
Yeah, boy, we could talk for several hours about what is often the disconnect between what a program is telling maybe funders or other stakeholders. Here's what we're going to do for youth in the community, but then you talk to youth and families, and sometimes their needs are a little simpler, and often they align with what, we all want kids to graduate and be healthy and go on to productive lives and careers, but I often do feel like, we never at the beginning of a program just gather up young people and their families and say, what do you want to get out of this? It seems like the most obvious thing in the world, but we often ask them to conform to the idea of the program rather than vice versa. I think one other question around kind of this dynamic of folks from different cultures and backgrounds mentoring. I think it's still fairly true in our field that most mentors, especially in our larger mentoring programs, are often white folks from fairly well-resourced backgrounds and communities. They are often mentoring young people who are not from those communities. What advice would you have for white mentors on how to be a good mentor to a young person of color, especially around avoiding kind of these notions of saviorism, and there's just so much potentially toxic, weird stuff there. And I know that can be intimidating for mentors. So have you learned anything through your research that you think is the key to kind of making those cross, racial and cultural relationships work for the best?
Yeah, so now I'm remembering another study I've done with young adults who used to participate in this mentoring program called Friends of the Children. And that actually identified a lot of characteristics that they appreciated in mentors. And a lot of it had to deal with one, just being authentic, being yourself. If you're not being completely organic, I feel like kids are better than anyone. And sensing that pretty quickly, and then that goes pretty south pretty quickly if someone feels like you're not being your complete self. Being humble and being flexible. I think when mentoring relationships fail, it's because people come in with these high expectations of, oh, I'm gonna completely change this person's life and I'm gonna get them into Harvard and they're gonna go on to Yale Law and then they'll write about me in their memoir. And it's just not, it's just not gonna work like that. Unfortunately, life isn't a Disney movie, but just teaching some pretty tangible skills or just going to the movies every Saturday. I mean, I think that's more than enough, and that's pretty positive influence on someone's life as well, especially depending on the goals and different things they have going on.
Right.
And I also would encourage mentors, especially those that aren't from the communities that they're serving, is it's okay to not know. And we have so many resources now in 2023, whether it's the documentary, whether it's a book, um, going to the mentoring program that you're volunteering for and asking for resources. I think we get into a lot of trouble when we just don't ask for help, but it's okay if we don't have the answers and just ask, and you can probably find someone in 2023 that can help you out in whatever you need help with.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think a lot of times mentors take on a pretty heavy burden. They're like, oh, I got to fix everything for this young person, which is not the right attitude, or they feel like I need to bring all the answers. But none of us come into a new relationship with, perfect foresight as to what this person's going to want or need. And I'm glad you mentioned the word humility there. I've seen many examples over the years of mentors who are like, oh, I'm gonna right your ship, I'm gonna kind of, and that's just such a deficit-based view of young people. I think it's important for mentors to be confident that, oh, I can do this, I can help somebody. I believe in myself as a volunteer, but once that crosses the line into like overconfidence, they lose that humility, I think. And you're right, as the father of two teenagers, they will pick up on your inauthenticity very, very quickly. This has been a great conversation, Kristian. We could probably talk for 10 hours here about these topics. Just curious, what do you have coming up in terms of new studies? Or is there anything on the horizon for you that you're particularly excited about that you think our viewers would want to hear about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm juggling a million different projects, and all of them are very exciting. Really hoping to get the paper about young adults and their experiences and friends of the children out pretty soon. Really excited about that. And youth mentoring literature, there's been a whole bunch of studies about a lot of different things, but the experiences of those who were in a program and have been out for a few years hasn't been tapped in as much as we definitely should and could. So very excited about that paper. But also just excited to like learn more as I like navigate life, because the more I learn about myself, the more it like enhances or informs my academic view as a scholar. So I mean it's been a rough decade for all of us. So
Yeah.
every day I learn something new about myself, and all of that like informs the scholarship.
Yeah, no, amen to that. It has been a rough but educational time for all of us. And I'm excited to hear that or see that paper when it's out. I have myself done a little bit of research around when you ask people to reflect many, many years back on these experiences. Man, you get these amazing stories of people that, you know, uh, didn't know it at the time, but were being influenced in these directions, and they can only see it through the vantage point of some time and some distance from it.
Mhm.
Almost all of our program evaluations are like, 10 minutes after the match ended, like, did this change your life? And it's like, yeah, they don't know if it changed their life. Like, find them when they're 40 and ask them then if it changed their life. And, just a little bit of that I've looked into. Americans really give their mentors a lot of credit for, and that doesn't mean, to your point earlier, they didn't all become wealthy and uber successful. But even those folks living fairly, humble lives, realize that they wouldn't have even gotten that far without these critical people. So I'm really curious to see kind of what you learn. And that you'll also hear these stories of lament where people years later recognize, oh, I had a chance to turn something around and I didn't take advantage of it. I kind of blew off my mentor, and now I regret it because I now realize that was a missed opportunity. So hopefully you'll get mostly positive stories of remembered mentors, but it is
Yeah, mostly
fascinating how
positive for sure.
time changes those perceptions for kids. I'm going to ask our silly bonus question, as I do of all of our guests this season. I'm asking everyone the same question. It's a variation on the classic, if you could invite four famous people from history to dinner, except my twist is I don't care who the four people are. I want to know what you're cooking for that dinner and what music you're playing in the background while people are eating.
Okay, wow, that's a great question. Um, so when the four famous people, because I'm stuck on that part, do they have to be currently living, or can they be like
No,
past
and
historical
no, you
figures?
can you can pick any four people you want.
Okay.
Yeah, last episode, Grace Gowdy didn't tell me who, but she was making mac and cheese, so I'm assuming it was four people that were not lactose intolerant. Uh,
Yeah, well, I definitely Nikki Giovanni, Thurgood Marshall, Arthur Ashe, would have loved to have met James Baldwin. And my cooking is trash, so definitely gonna cater some barbecue, have a cookout, and definitely like some freaky Beverly and Maze playing cameo, Earth, Wind, and Fire. I just want the vibes to be immaculate
yeah,
if I'm
yeah.
gonna be in their presence. Um, I'm probably not even gonna get barbecue cater. I'll probably pay my dad to barbecue because I love his ribs. So
All
that's
right.
probably what I would do. I care about too much about people for to cook for them, so I definitely wouldn't do that. But Those would be the four people I'd invite. Have some barbecue, probably some wine to keep it classy, since
Sure,
those are some of my idols,
sure.
and have some 70s, 80s R&B playing.
Well, you hooked me in with Cameo and James Baldwin. I'm there for that. I'm vegetarian, or else I'd take you up on your dad's ribs. But
We're
sounds
gonna
like
have baked beans too.
sounds like a great meal. Kristian, thank you so much for doing this. I can't wait to read some of these papers and studies you've got coming out in the next year or two. Thank you for everything you do for the National Mentoring Resource Center. And I hope our audience enjoyed this conversation. We've got more of these episodes to come in 2023 and hopefully do some more in 2024. So thank you for joining us this time on Reflections on Research, and we will see you soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.